My wife yanked off her wedding ring, threw it straight at me, and shouted, "Tonight, I'm single," before walking out and disappearing for the rest of the night. I believed exactly what she told me. By the following morning, I'd already made the decision to file for divorce. She ripped the ring from her finger, tossed it against my chest, and made it clear that, for that night at least, she wasn't my wife anymore. I stood in our apartment in Adams Morgan, watching the gold band bounce across the hardwood floor, and something inside me went completely numb. She grabbed her purse, slammed the front door behind her, and I listened as the sound of her heels faded down the hallway, almost like she thought she was walking toward a brand new life. A lot of guys would have lost it right then. They would have called over and over, filled her phone with messages, or spent the whole night hoping she'd come home full of regret. I didn't do any of that. I picked up the ring, placed it carefully on the kitchen counter under the overhead light, and snapped 3 pictures from different angles. After that, I created a new folder on my phone and named it Evidence, because there's one thing nobody warns you about when you get married. The second your spouse throws away the symbol of your marriage and announces they're single, they've practically handed you your case without realizing it. I was 29 years old at the time. We'd been married for 4 years, and until then, I honestly believed I knew what a stable marriage looked like. We met back in college when we were both young and optimistic. By then, we were living what most people would call the classic young professional lifestyle. We had an apartment with exposed brick walls, spent Sundays wandering the local farmer's market, and followed all those little routines that made us feel like we had our lives together. I worked as a project manager for a tech company, while she had a marketing job at a startup downtown. From the outside, our life looked almost too perfect. We had homemade pasta nights, lazy Sundays listening to podcasts, and the kind of relationship that made friends comment relationship goals under our photos. But about 2 months before that night, something started changing. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was at first. She began going out more often with coworkers, and it became normal for her to come home well after midnight smelling like alcohol and crowded bars. I've never been the jealous type, so I tried not to overreact. Whenever I asked how her evening had gone, she'd answer with a sentence or two before heading straight into the shower. Then one day I noticed her phone suddenly had a passcode I'd never seen before. On top of that, she'd delete message conversations right in front of me without even pretending to be discreet. I convinced myself it was just a temporary phase. Maybe she needed some breathing room. Maybe every marriage goes through difficult seasons, and this was simply ours. Looking back now, I honestly wonder how many warning signs a person can ignore before finally admitting something is seriously wrong. I kept making excuses, and I was completely wrong. That Friday evening started like almost every other one. I cooked dinner, making carbonara pasta, garlic bread, and everything that usually went with it. 7 o'clock came. No text. 8 o'clock passed. Still nothing. Eventually, I ate by myself, wrapped up her dinner, put it in the refrigerator, and sat down to watch something mindless on Netflix just to pass the time. She finally walked through the door at exactly 9:12 p.m. I remember the time because I checked my watch the second I heard the lock click. She wasn't drunk. In fact, she was perfectly sober, and somehow that unsettled me even more. She looked at me like I wasn't her husband anymore, just some random guy she happened to share an apartment with. I asked if she wanted me to warm up the dinner I'd saved for her. She laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was cold, tired, and almost mocking. "I'm 27 years old," she said as she tossed her purse onto the couch. "And I'm living like I'm 40. I'm tired of pretending we're this perfect little family." Then she kept going. "I'm tired of acting like this life is enough for me. I'm tired of you pretending everything between us is perfect when I feel like I'm slowly disappearing." I stayed as calm as I could. I simply asked what she meant and told her we could sit down and talk through whatever she was feeling. Before I could finish, she cut me off. She said there was nothing left to discuss and that she didn't want another one of my calm, logical conversations where I tried to solve everything with reason. That's when it happened. She pulled off her wedding ring and held it up between us as if it were proof that I'd committed some terrible crime. "This ring," she said, "is the symbol of my disappearance." Then she threw it as hard as she could. It struck my chest before falling to the floor, and somehow the sound of that little gold ring hitting the hardwood seemed louder than anything I'd ever heard. "I'm single tonight," she said while grabbing her purse again. She told me not to wait for her, not to call her, and not to do anything. Then she walked out. I stood there staring at the closed door for what had to be 10 minutes. Oddly enough, I didn't feel angry. I wasn't even overwhelmed with sadness. What I felt was clarity. It was like someone had flipped on every light in a pitch-black room. She had just looked me in the eye, in our own home, and freely declared that she considered herself single. She didn't say we were separated. She didn't say she needed time. She said she was single. I picked up the ring, but instead of putting it somewhere sentimental, I laid it on the kitchen counter like it was evidence from a crime scene. Then I did what any reasonably smart guy living in 2024 would do. I started documenting everything. I opened my phone and typed out a detailed timeline. I wrote down the exact time she got home, her words as accurately as I could remember them, the fact that she threw her wedding ring at me, and the fact that she left immediately after telling me she was single. After that, I logged into our phone account, confirmed everything was in order, checked the recording rules that applied in my state, and made sure my cloud backup was active. Then I called her. Straight to voicemail. I waited 25 minutes before trying again. Voicemail. On my fifth attempt, at around 9:30 p.m., she finally answered. I could hear loud bass shaking through the phone, people yelling over music, and the unmistakable sound of a crowded bar. She shouted over the noise, asking what I wanted. I asked where she was and whether she was safe. She laughed. She told me she was out enjoying herself and said something I couldn't fully hear over the music. Then she repeated the one sentence I understood perfectly. "I'm not your wife tonight." She added that she was free to do whatever she wanted before hanging up. The moment the call ended, I saved the call log, took screenshots, and uploaded everything to the cloud. Then I sat quietly on the couch and took a long breath. At that point, I knew this wasn't just another argument. It wasn't a rough patch. She had made a one-sided decision to destroy our marriage, and she'd created the evidence herself. At around 10:15 p.m., my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a photo. She was sitting at a rooftop bar with people I'd never seen before, smiling while holding a drink. The caption said, "Bet you wish you were more fun." I stared at that picture for a long time. Yes, it hurt. But more than that, I realized she just handed me exactly what I needed. I took screenshots, backed them up in 3 different places, and organized everything into an email folder complete with timestamps. I didn't answer. I didn't react. I refused to give her any emotional response she could twist against me later. I simply saved the evidence. By 11 p.m., I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, researching divorce attorneys in Washington, D.C. Eventually, I found one with outstanding reviews who specialized in high-conflict divorces and had a reputation for moving quickly. At 11:58 p.m., I called his emergency number. He answered on the 3rd ring, sounding fully awake. I gave him the shortest explanation I could. I explained to him that my wife had ripped off her wedding ring, thrown it at me, announced that she was single, walked out for the night, later sent me a photo of herself out partying, and told me she was free to do whatever she wanted. I also told him I had saved everything, recordings, screenshots, timestamps, and a detailed timeline of the entire night. For a few seconds, he didn't say a word. Then he finally spoke, and the tension I'd been carrying instantly started to melt away. "She just made your position much stronger." He told me not to delete a single file, not to reach out to her again unless she contacted me first, and to be at his office Monday morning at exactly 8 a.m. After I hung up, something hit me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was simply finished. She thought she was teaching me a lesson. In her mind, she'd go out, enjoy her little single fantasy, and come back expecting to find me sitting there feeling guilty, ready to apologize for not being exciting enough. What she didn't realize was that by the time she walked back through that front door, the process of ending our marriage would already be underway. That night, I slept better than I had in almost 2 months. For the first time in a long time, I knew exactly what my next move was. She came back Sunday morning expecting a conversation. Instead, she walked into a situation that was already moving forward without her. Around 10:30 a.m., I heard her key turn in the lock. A moment later, her purse landed in the hallway, and then her footsteps slowed when she saw me sitting calmly at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and my laptop open. She looked exhausted. Her mascara had smeared beneath her eyes. Her hair was a mess, and she was still wearing the same dress she'd left in on Friday night. She offered me a small, nervous smile, the kind people give after a minor disagreement, as if we'd only argued about chores or forgotten to take out the trash. In a quiet, careful voice, she asked if we could talk. I looked up from my coffee and simply said, "Check your email." She frowned, obviously confused. Then she pulled out her phone. I watched every emotion cross her face as she opened the message. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief turned into panic. Her eyes went wide, Her jaw dropped, and she stared at me as though I'd done something completely unimaginable. Holding up her phone, she asked what the hell she was looking at. "You're filing for divorce?" I took another sip of my coffee before answering. "You threw your wedding ring at me," I reminded her. "You told me you were single. I believed you." She immediately started pacing across the apartment. Her hands were trembling as she insisted it had only been one night. She said she'd been angry, emotional, and hadn't meant what she'd said. I stayed completely calm. I reminded her that she'd also sent me a photo of herself out drinking with other people along with a caption making fun of me. I reminded her that she'd repeated over the phone, on a recorded call, that she wasn't my wife that night and was free to do whatever she wanted. She stopped pacing. Suddenly her anger shifted toward me. "You recorded me?" she demanded. Then she started calling me controlling, saying I was obsessed with keeping tabs on her and that my behavior was exactly why she'd needed space in the first place. I shook my head. "There's a difference," I said, "between controlling someone and documenting what they chose to do." Seeing that approach wasn't working, she completely changed tactics. She sat across from me and reached for my hand. I quietly pulled it away before she could touch me. Her voice softened. She told me she'd made a mistake. She said she'd felt trapped, had reached her breaking point, and acted without thinking. Then she told me she loved me and didn't want our marriage to end. I looked directly at her, really looked at her, and to my own surprise, I felt absolutely nothing. I told her she hadn't simply snapped. She'd made one decision after another. She chose to throw away her wedding ring. She chose to declare herself single. She chose to leave. She chose to spend the night out. She chose to send me proof afterward. By then she was crying harder than ever. She asked if I was really willing to throw away 4 years of marriage because of one terrible night. She begged me to at least try. Without raising my voice, I stood up, carried my coffee to the sink, poured out what was left, and turned back toward her. Then I asked one simple question. Who threw the ring? The truth was, this decision hadn't started that morning. It had started the day before. At 8 o'clock Saturday morning, I'd already been sitting in my lawyer's office. His name was Nathan Whitmore. He was in his 50s, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, and carried himself like someone who'd seen every kind of divorce imaginable. He was also the kind of attorney who'd cancel his weekend plans because he recognized a genuine emergency the moment he heard one. I laid every piece of evidence in front of him. The photos of the wedding ring lying on the floor, the timestamps, the phone recording, the text message with the rooftop bar picture, every word she'd said. He arranged everything neatly across his desk as though he were preparing for trial, which in a way he was. After reviewing it all, he looked at me and said the evidence was strong. He tapped the picture she'd sent from the bar and pointed out that she'd openly declared herself single while documenting her own actions in writing. Then we moved on to finances. He asked about our assets, so I explained everything. The apartment lease was solely in my name. I'd paid the full security deposit before we moved in, and every utility bill had come from me since the beginning. We shared bank accounts, but I earned considerably more. Her salary was roughly 60% of mine. We didn't have children. Other than furniture and the normal household items every married couple accumulates, we didn't own any major property together. He nodded while taking notes. Then he explained that the divorce petition would be ready for electronic filing first thing Monday morning. He wanted to move before she had time to prepare her own legal strategy. By Saturday afternoon, all the paperwork and preparation were finished. For the first time in weeks, I felt strangely peaceful. Instead of absorbing every blow she threw at me, I was finally taking action. When she came home later that morning and finished crying, yelling, arguing, and trying every emotional approach she could think of, I calmly explained what was going to happen next. The apartment lease was in my name. She needed to pack her things. She stared at me as if I'd started speaking another language. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. I shrugged. "You wanted independence," I said. "You wanted to be single." She protested immediately. She insisted she had rights and claimed I couldn't simply force her out. Without saying much, I turned my laptop toward her. I showed her the lease with only my name on it. Then I showed her the payment records proving I'd covered the deposit, the utilities, the subscriptions, and practically every recurring expense from the very beginning. I told her she could stay with friends. She could stay with her sister. She could figure out another arrangement. But she wasn't staying in my apartment. That was when the insults started. She called me cruel. She accused me of punishing her. She said I wasn't the man she'd married. I let her say everything she wanted. I didn't interrupt once. When she finally ran out of words, I quietly said what had been on my mind ever since Friday night. The man you married would have waited for you. He would have forgiven you. He would have let you walk all over him. I paused for a second. But that man doesn't exist anymore. She packed 2 suitcases while crying the entire time. She slammed drawers, shoved clothes into bags, and muttered that I'd regret all of this someday. The moment she walked out the door, I changed the entry code. Then I emailed the building manager to explain the situation. I spent the rest of Sunday taking every wedding photo off the walls, every framed picture, every vacation photo, every smiling memory from beaches, parties, holidays, and anniversaries. I packed them carefully into a box and carried it into the storage closet. When I finished, the apartment felt different. Larger, quieter, cleaner. For the first time in months, it actually felt like I could breathe again. Early Monday morning, Nathan Whitmore officially filed the divorce petition electronically through the Washington, D.C. court system. By Monday afternoon, the divorce filing had officially been entered into the court system. Then, on Wednesday morning, she was served with the papers at her office. I only found out because her sister called me screaming into the phone, furious that she'd been served at work and saying it was humiliating. I kept my voice calm and told her there was nothing to discuss. If my wife wanted to talk, she could do it through my attorney. Then I ended the call. Right after that, I blocked her sister, her mother, and every member of her family that I knew would eventually start telling me to feel guilty. For the next hour, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. I got texts from numbers I didn't even recognize. Complete strangers, or at least people I'd never spoken to, were telling me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. They said I was acting too fast, that every marriage goes through hard times, and that forgiveness was what marriage was all about. I deleted every single message without replying. Have you ever noticed how the people who've never lived through your situation somehow have the strongest opinions about what you should do? Around 4 o'clock that Wednesday afternoon, she showed up at my apartment building. The concierge called upstairs and asked whether I wanted her sent up. I told him no. I asked him to let her know I wasn't available. Even so, I eventually went downstairs because I knew she wasn't going anywhere until she'd said whatever she'd come to say. She was standing near the elevators. It was obvious she'd gone out of her way to look her best. Her hair was perfectly styled. Her makeup looked flawless. And she was wearing the dress I'd always told her was my favorite. The second she saw me, her face lit up with hope, like she genuinely believed she could fix everything. She walked toward me and quietly begged me to give her 5 minutes. I folded my arms and told her she already had them. She took a deep breath. I could almost see her searching for exactly the right words, trying to build the speech she thought would change my mind. She admitted she'd behaved terribly. She said she wasn't trying to deny what she'd done. But then she insisted it had only been one terrible night, and she couldn't understand why I was willing to throw away our entire marriage over a single mistake. I didn't even react. It wasn't one night, I said. It was 8 weeks. 8 weeks of emotional distance. 8 weeks of deleted messages. 8 weeks of wondering why my own wife seemed to disappear. Friday night wasn't the beginning. It was simply the moment you made it official. She reached for my hand again. I stepped back before she could touch it. Then she admitted she was terrified. She said she was afraid of losing me. Afraid of ending up alone. Afraid she'd destroyed the best thing she'd ever had. This time the tears weren't forced. They were real. For one brief second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But some things can't be undone. You can't pull the pin on a grenade, I told her, and then ask someone to glue the pieces back together afterward. She completely broke down. Between sobs, she asked if that was really it. If 4 years together could really disappear just like that. I nodded. Yes, I answered. It really can. Then I turned around and went back upstairs. She didn't follow me. From my apartment window, I watched her remain in the lobby for another 10 minutes before finally walking outside and getting into an Uber. A few minutes later, my phone vibrated one last time. It was a text from her. It simply said I was going to regret everything I'd done. I deleted it immediately. Then I blocked her number. After that, I sat down on my couch. The apartment was silent. Completely silent. But for the first time in months, the silence didn't feel lonely. Felt peaceful. Finally felt like home again. The following Thursday, Nathan Whitmore called me with an update. She'd hired her own attorney. According to him, she was asking for alimony and half the value of the apartment. I wasn't surprised. I asked him whether she actually had any chance of getting either. He laughed. She can ask for anything, he said. Then he reminded me what we had. Evidence that she'd voluntarily left the marriage after declaring herself single. Evidence showing she'd abandoned the apartment. Documentation proving the lease was solely in my name. Records showing I'd been the one financially responsible for the apartment from the beginning. He also told me our preliminary hearing had been scheduled 6 weeks later. Before hanging up, he warned me to expect her to present herself as the victim. I told him I was ready, because I truly was. She'd convinced herself she could destroy our marriage on Friday night, spend the weekend living like she was single, then come back crying and apologizing until I gave in. She'd forgotten one important thing. I'm the kind of person who documents everything. 6 weeks later, on a Thursday morning, we walked into court for the preliminary hearing. I wore a suit. Nathan Whitmore walked beside me carrying a thick folder packed with printed documents. He smiled and told me judges love paper copies. My wife arrived about 10 minutes late with her attorney. He looked like he was somewhere in his 30s and honestly gave the impression he'd rather be anywhere else. She'd completely changed her appearance. Conservative clothes. Very little makeup. Her hair neatly pulled back. She looked exactly like someone trying to project the image of a heartbroken wife. We sat on opposite sides of the courtroom. She never looked at me. Instead, she leaned toward her lawyer, whispering quietly while occasionally dabbing her eyes with a tissue. The judge was a woman in her 50s. She had a serious expression and wasted absolutely no time getting through the preliminary matters. My wife's attorney spoke first. He described me as cold, impulsive, and unwilling to communicate. According to him, I'd filed for divorce after one argument, forced my wife out of the apartment with nowhere to stay, and ignored every attempt she'd made to repair the marriage. Listening to him, you'd think I was the one who'd abandoned her. Then Nathan Whitmore stood up. One by one, he presented the evidence. Photos of the wedding ring lying on the floor. The recording from the bar where she'd clearly announced she was single. The text message containing the rooftop photo and the mocking caption she'd sent me herself. Her attorney immediately objected to the recording, arguing it hadn't been legally obtained. Nathan calmly responded that he'd already verified Washington, D.C.'s one-party consent recording law before submitting it. The judge accepted it. She spent several quiet moments studying the photo my wife had sent. Then she looked directly at her. "Did you send this message?" she asked. My wife quietly nodded. Yes. Her voice was barely audible. Then she quickly added that she'd been upset, angry, and hadn't truly meant what she'd said. The judge didn't let that explanation pass. "What exactly?" she asked. "Did you mean when you told your husband you were single before going out for the night?" My wife immediately started crying again. She explained that she'd felt trapped inside the marriage. She said she'd needed space and admitted she'd made a terrible mistake. The judge didn't seem especially moved. If anything, she just looked exhausted from hearing stories like this. Then she turned toward me. "Do you have any intention of reconciling?" she asked. "No," I answered. "Once trust is broken this way, I don't believe it can be repaired." After hearing both sides, the judge issued temporary orders. I kept possession of the apartment. Our joint bank accounts would remain frozen until the assets could be divided. No temporary alimony would be awarded before the final hearing. Both of us were also ordered to attend mediation before the case could proceed to trial. My wife's attorney made one more attempt. He argued she needed temporary financial support because she supposedly had nowhere to live. Nathan immediately responded that she'd voluntarily left the marital home after publicly declaring herself single, and that she had family nearby who could help her. The judge agreed with our position. The request was denied. Outside the courtroom, my wife tried walking toward me. Before she could reach me, Nathan stepped between us and calmly reminded her that all communication now had to go through our attorneys. She stopped, turned her head, and looked back at me over her shoulder. Her eyes were red from crying. In a quiet voice, she asked one last question. "Do you really feel nothing?" I didn't answer her question. I simply turned around and walked away. The next week, she started posting on social media. At first, it was subtle. She shared vague posts about heartbreak, betrayal, and people suddenly showing their true colors. Her friends filled the comments with encouragement while calling me every insult they could think of. I never responded. I didn't argue with anyone or try to defend myself online. Instead, I took screenshots of every post and every comment, then forwarded them to Nathan Whitmore in case any of it became relevant later. A few of my own friends reached out, wanting to know what had actually happened. I gave them the short version. She threw her wedding ring at me. She told me she was single. She went out for the night. She sent me proof herself. I filed for divorce. Most of them weren't shocked. Several admitted they'd noticed she'd been acting differently for weeks. At parties, she'd pull away from everyone, spend most of the evening glued to her phone, and barely interact with me. One of my closest friends confessed something that caught me off guard. A few weeks before everything happened, he'd seen her at a bar talking very closely with another guy while I was supposedly working late at home. Part of me wished he'd told me sooner, but I also understood why he hadn't. Nobody wants to be the person who delivers news that could destroy someone's marriage. 3 weeks after the preliminary hearing, we attended mediation. It was scheduled for a Monday afternoon in a conference room downtown. The people in the room were exactly who you'd expect. Me, Nathan Whitmore, my wife, her attorney, and a mediator who looked like she'd spent decades handling divorces just like ours. She calmly explained how the process would work. This was our opportunity to settle everything without going to trial. It would save both sides time, money, and stress if we could reach an agreement. My wife's attorney presented their demands first. She wanted half of the increase in the apartment's value during our marriage. She also wanted half of the retirement contributions I'd made while we were married. On top of that, she wanted me to pay for her moving costs and cover the first month's rent at her new place. When it was our turn, Nathan Whitmore presented my offer. I was willing to pay her a one-time settlement of $15,000. According to him, that amount roughly reflected her financial contributions toward our shared household expenses during the marriage. In exchange, she'd waive every other financial claim against me and sign a complete settlement. Her lawyer immediately called the proposal unreasonable. Nathan didn't even hesitate. He reminded everyone in the room that she'd voluntarily walked away from the marriage, that the apartment had been leased before we were married, and that every important event leading up to the divorce had been carefully documented. The mediator suggested taking a short break. While my wife and her attorney stepped into the hallway, Nathan leaned toward me. "Don't move," he quietly said. "He's bluffing." Nathan was convinced the other side didn't have much leverage and was hoping we'd panic and increase the offer. A few minutes later, everyone returned to the conference room. Before the discussion resumed, my wife asked if she could speak directly to me. The mediator explained that it was allowed as long as both attorneys agreed. Nathan looked at me. I nodded once. "That's fine," he said. Her lawyer didn't look happy about it, but he didn't object. She looked across the table at me. Her hands were shaking slightly. In a quiet voice, she asked, "Is there any chance at all, that we can fix this?" I'd expected that question. I'd spent weeks preparing myself to hear it. Even so, hearing those words out loud felt strange. I looked at the woman I'd spent 4 years building a life with. The woman I'd imagined growing old beside. Yet somehow, she no longer felt familiar. She looked like someone I'd never really known. "No," I answered. My voice never wavered. She closed her eyes for a moment, almost as if I'd physically struck her. When she opened them again, the sadness was gone. It had been replaced with anger. "I hate you," she said. She said it loudly enough that even the mediator shifted uncomfortably in her chair. She accused me of giving up. She said I was heartless. She told me I was cold because I hadn't even tried to save our marriage. I stayed completely silent. I let her finish. Then I looked at her and spoke calmly. "Okay," I said. "That makes this a lot easier." Her attorney immediately reached over, rested a hand on her arm, and quietly whispered something to calm her down. She leaned back in her chair, breathing heavily as she tried to regain control. The mediator asked whether anyone wanted another break before continuing. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'd rather finish this today." My wife's attorney stepped aside with her for a few minutes before returning with a counteroffer. They wanted $25,000, and they also wanted me to pay her legal fees. Nathan Whitmore looked over at me. I quietly shook my head. We'd already agreed on the highest amount I was willing to offer, and this was well beyond it. Nathan turned back to them. "Our offer remains $15,000, he said. "It's final. Take it or leave it." He added that if they preferred to go to trial, we had no problem letting a judge review every photo, recording, screenshot, and timestamp in open court. That changed the mood immediately. Her attorney asked for another private discussion. He took her out into the hallway once more. When they finally came back inside, she looked exhausted. More than anything, She looked defeated. She accepted the offer. The settlement agreement was placed on the table, and we signed it right there in the mediation room. The mediator witnessed the signatures, making everything official. The divorce itself would still require Washington, D.C.'s standard 60-day waiting period before becoming final, but the financial issues were finished. I wrote her a check for $15,000. She signed paperwork giving up any future financial claims against me. From that moment forward, the separation was legally settled. As everyone gathered their things, she paused near the doorway. She looked back at me one last time. She didn't say a single word. She simply stood there, studying my face. Maybe she was trying to memorize it. Or maybe she was wondering how our lives had reached this point. A few seconds later, she walked away. Nathan Whitmore shook my hand. He told me I'd handled the entire situation exactly the way I should have. According to him, most people in my position would have given in once the emotions started taking over. I thanked him, paid the rest of his bill, and walked outside into the afternoon sunlight. For the first time in months, I felt light. Exactly 60 days later, an email from the court arrived. The subject line confirmed everything. The marriage had officially been dissolved. The divorce was final. I happened to be sitting at my desk at work when the notification appeared. For almost a full minute, I just stared at the screen. 4 years of marriage, reduced to a single PDF attachment. I forwarded the document to my personal email so I'd always have a copy for my records. Then I closed the message and went back to work. That weekend, I completely changed the apartment. I moved the furniture into different places. I bought new sheets for the bed. I replaced old picture frames with new ones. I wanted every room to feel like it belonged to me instead of reminding me of a life that no longer existed. I wasn't trying to preserve memories anymore. I was creating a fresh start. I also started running again. I'd given it up during the marriage because she always complained that I spent too much time doing it. This time, nobody was telling me how to spend my mornings. A little while later, I took a weekend trip to Portland. Just me. No detailed plans. No schedule. No pressure. I simply went wherever I felt like going. About 3 months after the divorce became final, I received a promotion at work. It was the same opportunity I'd been chasing for a long time but had never fully focused on because my personal life had been consuming all of my attention. Slowly, my life started feeling like it belonged to me again. I wasn't just going through the motions anymore. I was actually living it. People eventually started asking whether I was dating anyone. I always gave the same answer. No, not yet. I told them I needed time to figure out who I was outside of being someone's husband. And that was the truth. The funny thing was, I didn't actually miss her. What I missed was the idea of having a stable relationship. I missed the idea of sharing life with someone. But I didn't miss her. Realizing that told me everything I needed to know. Confirmed I'd made the right decision. I've spent a lot of time thinking about stories like this, and one lesson keeps coming back to me. The moment respect disappears from a relationship, protecting your own dignity becomes one of the most important choices you can make. Setting healthy boundaries doesn't mean you're being cruel. It means you're recognizing your own worth and refusing to accept less than you deserve. Choosing your own peace isn't selfish. Sometimes it's one of the strongest decisions a person can make. Real healing begins when you stop waiting for someone else to fix what's broken and start taking responsibility for your own future. When you're willing to be kind to yourself first, it becomes much easier to bring kindness into every other part of your life. And sometimes, walking away from something that's no longer healthy is exactly what opens the door to real peace. Take a moment today and ask yourself what boundaries you need to protect in your own life. You deserve relationships built on respect, trust, and a sense of safety. Thank you for spending your time here with me. I truly appreciate you being part of this journey. Never forget that you already have everything you need to build a happier, more peaceful future for yourself. If you enjoyed the story, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and support the channel. I'll see you in the next one.